I want to just mention the story in the front page of the Times today. Sir Keir Starmer demanding urgent action from cabinet ministers to avoid a repeat of last summer's rioting in England after warnings from Downing Street officials that Britain is fraying at the edges. So the Prime Minister is telling the Cabinet it's vital to repair Britain's social fabric and improve integration in areas which have experienced high levels of migration. Scotland did not experience any far-right violence or anti-immigration riots during last summer, where they kind of flared up in various places actually elsewhere. Andy, when we say that Scotland, there was nothing comparable from last summer, does Scotland need to pay attention to this warning from the Prime Minister as well? Britain fraying at the edges is what he is saying. Is that warning as pertinent for Scotland as it might be for England this summer?
Look, I'll probably say two things that are completely contradictory to one another. I think we don't want to overstate these things and sensationalise these things if it's not really particularly valid. I think it's fair to say that there is an increase in Scotland in kind of low. We talked about this with Calum Steele a couple of weeks ago. You know, it does seem to be fairly clear that there's an increase in relatively low level antisocial behaviour, and I think it's symptomatic of a lot of other political issues, you know, cost of living, welfare, particularly amongst younger people. I think there are big problems there. There's big unrest there. But I think that we don't want to blow this out of proportion. Scotland is not England, and Scotland doesn't necessarily experience the same things that England experiences, particularly around the issue of immigration, to which this is relatively closely tied. At the same time, and here's a completely contradictory statement, there is nothing worse than Scottish exceptionalism when it comes to all this sort of thing. We share the same island. We're similar sorts of people. The conditions that exist for unrest in England could easily exist in Scotland at some point. And so I don't think we want to exercise too much exceptionalism about this issue and presume that sort of thing could never happen here. But I suppose my overarching message is, let's not wish for something that's not necessarily on the cards.
Do you know what? When you were speaking there, do you remember the riots in 2011, Andy?
Yep.
And I think, if memory serves, there was a shooting of a young black man in London from the Metropolitan Police, and that kind of sparked riots.
That's what sparked it. Yeah.
In London,
the looting and the fires.
But it went all the way up to Newcastle.
Okay.
And we were in government, and we were genuinely worried that this was going to come to Scotland. And so I totally agree, and you can't be complacent. And we could all speculate as to different factors and all the rest of it, less populous areas and all the rest of it. It's like, I don't know. But what I do know is that Salmond was really worried about this, and he undertook a number of different visits with different kind of cultural leaders, religious leaders. So I think he went to some mosques in Glasgow. He visited with the Jewish community. He visited various different kind of communities, making a bit of a strong message saying, this is not the way to go. I can't remember the exact words. Sorry, if I'd known this was coming up, I should read our pre-briefing stuff more, because I would have looked out some of the stuff. But anyway, Salmond was to suggest that we were concerned that the contagion wouldn't get to Scotland is not true. We were extremely concerned, and we were putting out he was spending a lot of his time going into communities, meeting different diversity groups, leaders, and all the rest of it to try and calm the jets, because there was a sense that something could happen. There were some minor issues, actually. There was some minor events, but nothing really took hold. So, yeah, I think the biggest key thing here is you can never be complacent, and whatever the reasons are. Thankfully, it hasn't translated to the same extent in Scotland, and you really don't want to see that happen.
Yeah, for sure. Just quite a stark warning, isn't it, to have that reporting from Downing Street. And I just want to bolt on a question, actually, from Jamie, who got in touch last week, pointing to a report by the More in Common think tank that suggests that people just don't trust our politicians, which perhaps doesn't feel like a news flash, but actually 60% say they wouldn't trust Keir Starmer, more than half say they wouldn't trust Nigel Farage. And I think something that struck me in here is a generational divide, that young voters show even lower trust levels in political leaders than people who are older. And that's really worrying, isn't it? If young people aren't feeling like they can look to political leaders and say, I trust you to change things, to make things better, etc. That is a concerning place to be, Geoff.
Yeah. Do you know, I listened again, because this is how I spend my weekends. I'm rock and roll, to our Anna Sarwar and John Swinney podcast that we did live, a month ago now?
Yeah, just a few weeks ago.
Yeah. It was a good event. I thought both of them approached it pretty openly, except when I re-listened, there wasn't very many substantive answers. There was a lot of evasion. And... which I find surprising, given that they're 8 months out for an election and it's eeksy-peeksy. You'd think you'd be taking every opportunity to try and, sell a message. And then, it got me thinking about listening to politicians across the divide just now, across the UK. There really isn't much conviction, singularity of purpose. And you understand why, a guy like Nigel Farage comes along with 3 easy messages and goes, well, at least he's speaking his mind or saying something. I'm not surprised that people are not trusting or satisfied with our body politic just now, put it that way. And I think one of the root causes is we've got a series of politicians that are quite afraid to speak directly. Okay, so what is your views? What do you think about this? And what is your suggested solution? And we're not getting that from our politicians just now. It's the rarity, not the norm, if we are. And I wonder if that is actually adding to a sense of malaise across our politics. With younger people, I think you can go into the whole social media. Where are they getting their news today? Where are they getting their information from? Are they just going to places that reaffirm their kind of broad views? I don't know, but it is hugely alarming. My wee nephews, man, like, they're coming of age now, they're teens and that. Can't get them interested in anything to do with, political or public discourse just now. Was I like that back then? I don't know. But it is worrying. I don't know.
Yeah, the last thing you said there, was I like that back then? I don't know. I think that's an important part of it. I'm going to be contradictory again with myself here. It's always the case that we say, I see young folk, they don't, they're a nightmare, that lot. They're a nightmare. But actually, in most cases, the views of young people develop over time. As the old saying goes, I always remember the old saying, if you're not a socialist when you're 18, you don't have a heart, and if you're still a socialist when you're 30, you don't have a brain. Views develop over a period of time. So a lot of what we're seeing from young people now will change. At the same time, and here's the contradictory bit, I do think there is a difference between the lack of connection between young people and mainstream leaders now than there has been in the past. I mean, what's Nigel Farage's biggest asset? It's not policy, even on something like immigration. It's not actually a policy asset that he's got. The biggest asset Nigel Farage has is that people think he understands them. That's why he does well. They look at him and they say, he gets it. He gets it. He understands why I'm really hacked off with life. The others don't get it. He does. Now, whether or not that's not a commentary on whether or not that is in fact the case, that he gets it. But he has absolutely nailed the perception that he understands the real lives of real people outside of the internal elite boundaries of the M25. And that's his biggest asset. And I do think that disconnect between people, not just young people actually, people and mainstream politics is probably bigger than it has ever been before. And that, to link back to our earlier conversation, that is no different in Scotland than it is in the rest of the UK.
You see, but the thing is, Andy, right? There's a whole different podcast we need to talk about, Nigel Farage's tactic, because I think essentially he just engenders fear, and much of what he does, and it's what Trump did as well. These people are to blame. The solutions that come are not particularly substantive, to these self-made problems, and so I don't like that brand of politics, never have. But your point about young people, I was thinking, we did engage. The Scottish Government did, and actually all body politic, all the opposition parties through the referendum campaign, we engaged young people like never before. I mean, listen, it was 83% turnout, for goodness sake. It was almost mass turnout for the referendum. But I do think in the intervening years there has been a slow decline in engagement, and I also, to your point, which really bugs me about some people in the SNP, they're like, young people are all for independence, it's only a matter of time. suggesting that these people will never change their views. You know, like that's I just hate that. You know, people need constantly persuaded, constantly reminded. The debate needs to continue for all people of all ages. And I always get annoyed when I hear that. I think Angus Robertson said it a few times, like when he looked at polling. I was like, that's so naive. You know, tragically naive to think that these people, you know, continue viewing the world that way. You have to continue to make the case.
Fair point. Absolutely
you know,
fair.
Just this is a different podcast, Geoff. You're right, and we should do something on this.
Yeah, we should.
In the summer.
We've just written it
Get
down.
We're blethering a wee bit today, boys, and we know we're going off the script. The script that I never bloody read.
Well, I was going to say you didn't know the script anyway, so it's fine. Just though what you said,
try my
the
best.
hope, the fear thing, I think is interesting. So people like us, let's be honest, people like us don't vote for Nigel Farage and people like him, right? Because that's, you know, we are in the elites that they don't like, okay? But we look and so we look upon these things as fear mongering. But don't underestimate how many of the people who do vote for him, they don't look at it as fear, they look at it as hope. So take it to America, forget about Farage for a second, right? In America, we might think of it as fear when Trump says the immigrants are all taking your jobs. But the people who are voting for him, they see it as hope that they're going to get a job in that factory that's going to reopen. That's a hopeful message for them. It's not a fearful message for them, it's hope.
Yeah, I don't deny that, and it's well put, and you corrected me rightly, and I was being too simplistic. I think my point is more, it seems to me that these politicians, Trump, Farage, have prospered for pointing out negatives in our society and never going for a positive. And then, okay, I was part of a very positive time in politics through 2007 to 14, in my opinion. Of course, negative campaigning always takes place throughout that. It's always part and parcel of politics. But overarching, you were talking about the art of the possible. This is what we want to achieve. And I suppose that it's why it's more the negative kind of campaign. Brexit is the reason for all your ills. It's all them. It's European bureaucrats. Now it's immigrants and all that. And that's not to say that there isn't a kernel of truth in all of these things. That perhaps the European Union was far too bureaucratic. Perhaps we are having too many immigrants, but it's in a negative framing is my point. You know, it's about the things stopping us as opposed to the things that we can try and achieve in our own rights. And that's what I struggle with politics. But yes, you're right. We would be viewed as the elites and the bubble, even though I'm never in Parliament like you're in every week. I think I've been in 3 times since I left politics.
Thank you for getting in touch with lots of your questions and thoughts and things that you want to hear discussed. They're very welcome. You can send them anytime. Email hello@holyroodsources.com or you can get in touch on WhatsApp as well, 0333 404 6507.